I will now yield to the good gentleman from the Commonwealth, Chairman Yarmouth, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Arrington, Ranking Member Boyle, members of the committee. Let me echo and underline the kind comments that Mr. Womack has made and Senator Conrad and others, and say it is a great honor for me to be part of this panel, even though I'm going to be that proverbial object in the punch bowl. And say that when I was Steve Womack's ranking member, and then he was my ranking member, and I can't imagine having had a more mutually respectful, collegial, and serious partnership than the two of us have had and still have. And I was proud to come and say a few remarks when his portrait was unveiled here, and I hope he will return when I am here to unveil my portrait. But anyway, I'm honored to be here before the committee I once chaired to discuss proposals to create another, and I say that with purposeful skepticism, Commission on the Federal Fiscal Condition. Having served in Congress during a period that saw at least 4 different attempts to assist Congress with doing one of its most fundamental jobs, I can only characterize this new commission proposal as the proverbial definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. As has been discussed, I spent a large amount of time in 2018 as a member of the Joint Select Committee on Budget and Appropriations Process Reform under the very thoughtful leadership of Mr. Womack. I was constantly impressed with the seriousness of the committee's discussions and hearings. Many well-meaning people from outside and inside of Congress offered their thoughts on how we could reform our budgeting process and appropriations process, primarily, I think, with the implicit goal of reducing our annual deficits and the national debt. While some of the other members of that committee, we have 2 of them here, may take issue with my evaluation, I believe the process illuminated one fairly obvious but unavoidable truth. The problem is not the process, it's the people. In other words, if members of Congress are not willing, and this phrase has already been used, to muster the determination and courage to take on our fiscal challenges, even the best ideas will never be implemented. I would argue the same conclusion could be reached about the Domenici-Rivlin Task Force and Simpson-Bowles Commission. And even those who think the 2011 Budget Control Act was effective must remember that the only reason it was enacted was because it avoided a default on our debt. And that virtually every year we waived the budget caps because they were impractical and unpopular, and there was bipartisan relief when that law expired in 2021. Plus, the commission established under that law could not reach a consensus on any new course of action. And by the way, the national debt doubled during the 10 years the budget caps of the 2011 Act were in effect. Of course, every one of these efforts stems from the presumption that our debt and deficits are unsustainable. I heard that argument every one of the 16 years I served in this body. I am sure that back during the Lincoln administration, when the national debt reached $1 billion, people were warning that they were leaving an unsustainable burden on their grandchildren. I know they were saying that when the debt reached $1 trillion during the Reagan years. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know of one grandchild who has ever been asked to repay a penny of that debt. I have 2 young grandsons, and the last thing I worry about for them is that they will have to pay back some of the national debt. If you believe, as most do, that it would be better for us not to have $1 trillion annual deficits and $33 trillion in debt, the course of action is not a mystery. You either cut spending or raise revenues or both. Doing that is Congress's job and not a commission's or task forces, not even the bipartisan bicameral committee we had in 2018. So I'd like to offer some other suggestions. Why not have the Oversight Committee actually do oversight on some of the more expensive government activities and see where money can be saved rather than holding wasteful hearings on Hunter Biden and his laptop? Why not have the Ways and Means Committee meaningfully explore the Social Security and Medicare programs to see how their fiscal conditions can be strengthened? And let me say as an aside on Social Security, everybody says there are only 3 courses of action on Social Security: raise revenues, raise the retirement age, or reduce benefits. There's another answer. The only reason the trust fund is an issue is because the law says that benefits have to be paid out of the trust fund. Congress can change the law, say that benefits are paid out of the general fund. Then the trust fund issue goes away, like that. There's another way that Congress enact, because Congress basically sets the interest rate that the Social Security Trust Fund gets from the government. So the premiums come in, Social Security payments come in, Treasury issues bonds to the trust fund. They're not normal government bonds. They're bonds of special issue. They can't be marketed, and they bear an interest rate that Congress sets the formula for. Congress can change that. So there are options available to us, but it takes serious thoughts on the ways of Congress. What else can we do? The Energy and Commerce Committee can do the same thing with Medicaid. And while they're at that one, they can passionately look at the oil subsidies that cost us billions. Same with sugar subsidies that not only have direct costs, but enormous indirect healthcare costs. And finally, maybe this committee can actually analyze the national debt issue to determine whether the debt we have and will have is really unsustainable or not. And how can we judge that moving forward? It can't be just looking at a graph with constantly rising line and getting scared. One final thought is that commissions and task forces don't have souls. Hopefully, members of Congress do. A government without a soul is not a functioning government, regardless of how much or how little it costs. I look forward to your questions.
I thank the chairman, and we need to make sure that we have attainable aspirations in this committee. So to suggest that we're going to need members of Congress to have a soul is a really difficult start to this conversation. I'm not going to ask any questions. I want to make a comment, and then I'm going to defer to my colleagues. It is so unfortunate, but our conferences have called meetings at 11 o'clock, both sides. And I hate that, because this is the beginning of a very important conversation. And I just want you to know that my desire and what I will work towards accomplishing is inviting both the Democrats and Republicans in our conference more broadly in an auditorium to have a bipartisan discussion and panel Q&A with you all here. So we'll have more time for discussion. But we have to break. I'll probably stay till 11:15. Some members will leave, so just understand that's what that's about. I'm going to resist actually making any more comments. I appreciate the diverse opinions and the contrarian views. Now let's debate, and let's seek the counsel of our gentleman in front of us. So I'm going to defer to Mr. McClintock for my set of questions. Can I do that? Yeah. Can he ask my questions and I'll just go?
I think so, right? Yeah,
Let me do that. I yield 5 minutes, but let's try to make it as quickly as we can to let everybody have their time to ask a question.
Well, I'll
Mr.
try not to
McClintock.
take 5 minutes. I don't want to shock everybody, especially myself, but I agree with what John Yarmouth said. He's either gotten a lot wiser since he left Congress, or I've gotten a lot dumber, but one way or another, we've had a meeting of the minds. Shakespeare put it best: the fault, dear Brutus, it lies not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings. You know, all the CYA commissions we can think of won't work without people willing to make hard decisions. There's no substitute for leadership and courage and common sense. The budget process only works when the House leadership is willing to exercise that courage and common sense and make fiscal responsibility an absolute priority and insist on it throughout the House. Under Newt Gingrich and John Kasich, we had that leadership and we had that determination. And we had a president who was willing to work with them, and we balanced the budget 4 years in a row and set this country back on course toward fiscal balance. The chairman's correct. We haven't done our jobs. So just easier to blame the process and now propose to hand that hot potato off to an unelected commission, presumably exercising superhuman wisdom that we haven't been able to summon. And when our constituents complain, we just have to say, hey, it's in the hands of a bipartisan commission, and they'll figure it out. Well, we missed the central point. The ultimate bipartisan commission in this nation is called the Congress. And this Congress, as imperfect as it is where these decisions must be made. Passing the buck is simply not the answer, because the buck stops here. A dollar cannot be spent by this government until and unless this House says that it can be spent. So there's no substitute for Congress, and if it hasn't worked recently, we need to look at ourselves and not farm it out to others. There is no shortage of experts and think tanks, left, right, and center, with every conceivable solution to our problems. Some are really good, some are really bad, and it is our job to know the difference and to act accordingly. There's been a House rule since 1836 that forbids any expenditure of funds not authorized by law. That provision requires exactly the oversight and review that Mr. Yarmouth recommends. But we always waive that rule, throw billions of dollars at programs whose authorization has expired decades ago, and then go about our business as if nothing has happened. The budget process that's in place offers a logical, step-by-step process for responsible, serious budgeting if we would simply use it. And it did work when Congress used it and insisted on it. It's true, we're badly divided by partisanship because the American people are badly divided by partisanship. And what is Congress but a reflection of the people? Madison said if every member of Congress were a Socrates, it would still behave like a mob. Our fiscal situation is dire because of bad decisions made here over many years, and it can only be corrected here. It's becoming so dire that it cannot be ignored much longer. Reality, I think, is about to catch up with us, and we're going to, as Lincoln once said, need to rise with the occasion, to disenthrall ourselves and then save our country. Anything you'd like to add, Mr. Yarmouth? I never thought I'd be inviting this, but your testimony is spot on.
Well, I appreciate that. No, I never thought we would agree on anything either. Yeah, and I think, and Steve Womack mentioned this as well. If you go back and look at Greenspan, you're talking about 1981. It was a different world in 1981 in terms of the geopolitical climate in this country. We had liberals and conservatives in both parties, so there was always something you could find common ground with in the other party. That doesn't exist anymore, and on most issues we default to our party's position. And we don't take the time to really...
Yeah, but the process does work after a fashion. The reason we built that beautiful building was to do one thing and one thing only. It was to talk out our differences. And we need to get back to that. And not in a commission, but here.
We absolutely do. And we can't... I haven't been out of it so long that I can't say we still. But Congress can be the role models that will help the people change their perspective.
I thank the gentleman from California. His time has expired. I now recognize Ranking Member Boyle from Pennsylvania for any questions.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Chairman, first, I've quite a laundry list here, so bear with me. I ask unanimous consent to include into the record the following. A statement for the record for Max Rickman, President and CEO of the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. Congressional testimony statement for the record from AFG, the American Federation of Government Employees. A letter to both of us from AFSCME. A letter for the record from the Bipartisan Policy Center. A piece from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, written by Sharon Parrott and Joel Friedman. And finally, a letter to the both of us from Strengthen Social Security.
With regard to all the above, without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so following your lead and given the unfortunate timing that both of our caucuses have called for internal meetings beginning at 11, I will defer my questions then and yield to Mr. Higgins. But before I do, I'll just say one thing. I want to underscore something that Chairman Womack said, and it's beyond just this committee. Our internal divisions as a Congress and increasingly as a country is a massive national security threat. And all of us as elected officials have a real responsibility, a solemn responsibility, to not play into that or exacerbate it, but to attempt to heal the divide. Because if not, we're going down a very dangerous road. And with that, I will yield to Mr. Higgins.
We'll give Mr. Higgins his full 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member, and thank you, distinguished panel here. I would prefer to look at this issue from a position of strength. The United States is 5% of the world's population. We're 25% of the world's economy. You look at every measure, and it's reported clearly in The Economist magazine about the growth of American prosperity within a world context. In 1990, America represented 40% of the wealth of the top 7 economies in the world. Today, it's 58%. You look at productivity, you look at the workforce in America, it far exceeds that in the last 20 years of Europe, of China, of Japan. And the American economy does best when we invest in the growth of the American economy. So when we look at debt and deficit, we have to look at the contemporary history. And America grows down its debt and deficit when the economy grows. So finding ways to expand the middle class is essential to dealing with debt and deficit over the longer term. You know, Peter Drucker, the great Harvard economist in the 1960s and 70s, said that the whole purpose of creating an economy is to create a middle class. They pay our taxes, they fight our wars, they protect our neighborhoods, they teach our children, they take care of our people in terms of health care. And the strength of a society generally is viewed based on the size of your middle class. So I think that is essentially important. You think about all of the difficulty that we've overcome as a nation, particularly in the age of the pandemic. You know, nobody was lining up for Russian and Chinese vaccines. They were lining up for American vaccines and the messenger RNA technology that was developed with taxpayer dollars. With taxpayer dollars over a 30-year period. It's the genetic material that tells a cell to make a protein, which is the active ingredient in the vaccine. It saved 1 million people and helped cure another 45 million people. 12, the top universities in the world, of the 15 top universities in the world, are in the United States. We are a dynamic economy. We are an innovative economy. We are a destination for people all over the world that want to experience the American dream. And when they succeed, we succeed as a nation. So I appreciate all the talk about how horrible things are. But let me tell you something. They ain't all that horrible. And Bloomberg Analytics in February of this year had 15 economists focus in on 15 areas of the American economy. They said, not me, that Joe Biden is on his way to being the greatest jobs-producing president in the history of the United States. The unemployment rate is at a 54-year low. Last year at this time, inflation was at 8.1%. Now it's down to about 3% and continues to come down. So Democrats and Republicans, many of whom here, profess to be concerned only about the American people and the American economy, and I believe that. But I think all of us would be much better off focusing in on the strength of America as a basis from which to grow and to deal with our problems and stop pointing fingers, because historically, each party has played a role in the responsibility for the decline. But each party should also be embracing and celebrating the great economy that is built, and that of which is America. So, Mr. Yarmouth, I would say to you, as the former chair of this committee, your views about how we can use the strength of the American economy and the dynamic nature of the American economy within the context of the global economy to continue to grow and create opportunities for the American people.
Well, I appreciate your comments, Mr. Higgins, and what I would say is I think when you look at the American economy, this is the question that everybody should ask when we're talking about debt and deficits, because $33 trillion, the vast majority of that $33 trillion represents investments that the government has made in the American people. That money has gone into the economy, it's gone into the American people's hands. And until the Fed began raising interest rates just a year and a half or so ago, you can make a pretty strong case that the national debt grew by a significant amount without any negative impact on the economy, on the strength of the dollar, on interest rates, and/or inflation. And the pandemic changed everything and created a situation which will take years to analyze. But we went from basically 2008 to 2020 with a huge growth in the federal debt, and again, no negative impact on any of those key factors. So that's why I suggest that we really have to, before we start talking about whether the debt and deficits are problems, we ought to actually try to get a really good look at what is sustainable and what's not. And we are a sovereign currency. We can print all the money we want to serve the people whom we serve. And so I don't know what the right measurement is. Japan has national debt that's 240% of their GDP. They issue bonds from their government with statutory 0% interest rate, and people buy them. So we can answer the question, why are we paying interest on the money we borrow? And why do we borrow money anyway? We can print it and put it in the Treasury. So I just think there's a lot of analysis that we need to do to look at how the money system works in this country and whether we really have something to worry about. And again, with the strong economy, I think you can make a pretty strong case that our debt is not holding us back at this point.